we can be responsible for producing our own results, and I think we should use our executive abilities. But what we can't do ourselves, if it's worth having or doing, we can see ourselves having or doing. And the universe can be supportive of us. One of the basic teachings in the modern metaphysical movement here in America that started to blossom around the middle 1800s, first the influence emerged from the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson and his colleagues, but who also read the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. They didn't tell me that in high school. I found that out later. That literature had just at that time recently been translated into English, and they got their hands on it and were attracted to it. But then of course there was Christian Science, and there was Unity, School of Practical Christianity, founded by the Fillmores in the 1800s. And later in the early 1900s, Ernest Holmes established the religious science or science of mind movement. And of course, then the yogis started coming to town. Vivekananda came in 1893, and then a few others come on the scene. Didn't make big public waves, but they were here. And Yogananda came in 1920 and made a big impact. But the early New Thoughters are called Unity, Christian Science, and Science of Mind, and so forth. They emphasize that there was one universal mind, of which our minds are units, and that we can interact with that one mind. Emerson just, as I mentioned, having read the Bhagavad Gita and other literature from India, he wrote one of his essays, or referred to in his essays, to the one mind common to us all. There is one universal mind, or mind thinking principle, and I have to sometimes define it, because whenever I use the word mind, and I'm talking now, I'm reminded when I first went to Germany to lecture in the late 1970s, the woman who sponsored my talks there in several cities and traveled with me and the others and translated for me. She told me ahead of time that here in Germany we don't have a word for mind. You say mind, but we don't know what you mean by mind when you use the word. So please use the word Gebot, or thinking principle. So I said, all right, I'll do that. So words are not always interchangeable from one language to another. But we call it mind, that which thinks. And man is from the Sanskrit word mana, the thinker, that which thinks. Thinking principle. That's where the word man comes from. We're not talking about the gender, we're talking about the species. But anyway, there's a thinking principle, a cosmic thinking principle, or some call it a cosmic subconsciousness that is universal, everywhere present, and human minds and minds of critters are individualized units of it. That's the metaphysical theory. Therefore, our desires, our awareness of needs or wants, our imaginings enter into this universal mind, which is inclined to be responsive to us. So that's why you can imagine your way to health, happiness, and success, and imagine yourself living the kind of life you ought to live and you want to live, even if you can't get yourself into gear and do it. With your will, you can imagine yourself doing it, and that is a big plus. See yourself doing it. And athletes do that, basketball players and golfers and baseball players and track stars and high jumpers. They will say, oh yeah, I see myself doing it. And my body just follows through, and it's effortless when they're in the flow, when they're in the zone, they call it. It's just effortless. It just happens. So use your imagination creatively. Creative imagination is intentional, controlled. Uncontrolled imagination can be fantasy, and there's time for a little bit of fantasy now and then if you're sort of daydreaming and speculating and thinking about possibilities. That's all right to fantasize a little bit. How would it be if? But you don't want to walk around in fantasy and make-believe world all the time. That's not being healthy-minded. But, and of course, we don't want to believe what is not true. Many people, in the realm of religion and philosophy and so forth, they have these beliefs that are not true, and they hold on to them. Well, I was taught this when I was a kid, or my family believed this way, and it's hard to get it out of my head, and so forth, People tell me that sometimes, they say, well, I grew up in a fundamentalist church, or I grew up in this religious influence, and I got these ideas in my head about what God is and what my what God wants of me, and I know better intellectually, but it's still there in the subconscious. And every time I start thinking about these things, these memories come up with these feelings and these moods associated with them, and it clouds my mind. It causes confusion. So I think I know what to believe, but I find it difficult to believe, and so forth.